No one dared approach cage number 4 at the State Police Canine Rehabilitation Center, a dark, cold corner where the air seemed denser than anywhere else in the facility, thick with a metallic smell of fear and suppressed aggression. Inside that cell of concrete and reinforced beams was Rex, a 30-kilo German shepherd who was more than an animal. He seemed like a storm trapped in a furry body, a creature who had long since ceased to be a dog and had become a living warning. The most experienced trainers, tough guys who had to deal with stray pit bulls and uncontrollable Rottweilers, kept their distance, avoiding direct eye contact because they knew that what lurked behind those dark amber eyes wasn't simple fury, but something much older and much dangerous, a trauma so deep it had shattered his psyche. Rex didn't bark like the other dogs. He didn't ask for attention or demand food. He emitted a low, vibrating, almost subsonic growl that made your eyes twitch and your skin burn. An unmistakable sign that, if he missed the slightest opportunity, he would attack to kill, not out of malice, but because in his fragmented mind, the war had never ended. Mark, a veteran of the canine unit with more scars on his soul than on his body, stood before the cage, a cup of lukewarm coffee in his hand and a rug under his arm, a rug that had sealed the animal's fate, watching as the dog huddled in the darkest corner, its muscles taut like steel cables about to snap. Mark could read dogs better than people, and what he saw there broke his heart. He didn't see a monster. He saw a soldier abandoned in enemy territory, waiting for a rescue that would never come. The report was brutally clear. Rex had been a hero in Afghanistan, a legendary explosives detector who had saved hundreds of lives, until that cursed day in Helmand Province, when an improvised explosive device hidden beneath the sand detonated with too much force. The explosion didn't kill Rex, but it led him to his handler, Sergeant Miller, the only human being in the world the dog trusted implicitly, his spiritual guide, his protector, his entire being. Days later, Rex was found wandering among the rubble, dehydrated and guarding a piece of Miller's charred uniform, and since then, the dog who was once the pride of the battle had become a violent ghost, unable to tolerate human contact, reacting to any loud noise with lethal defensive violence. "You're going to fall short, buddy," Mark whispered quietly, making excuses, knowing that the administration had signed the euthanasia order scheduled for the end of the week. No miracle, it seemed, arguing that Rex was an irrecoverable asset and a personal danger. The dog slowly raised his head, his eyes showing a grimace that wasn't a smile, but a promise of pain, his ears flattening against his skull as his eyes scanned Mark for the gun, the rifle, the bomb. To Rex, the present world was a hallucination. He was still there. In the desert, hearing the sound of wire and blood, feeling the scorching heat and the unbearable absence of Miller's voice saying, "Good boy." Every time someone tried to put a harness on him, Rex relived the moment of the explosion, the chaos, the screams, and his survival instinct took over completely, turning him into a biting machine designed to neutralize threats. Mark sighed, feeling helplessness pressing on his chest, because he too had lost comrades. He too woke up sweating at night to the sound of ghostly gunshots, and he understood that silent pain that snatches you away from the world. But he didn't know how to cross the abyss that separated his hand from the dog's head without losing his fingers in the attempt. That afternoon, the sky darkened with plume clouds that foreshadowed one of those typical thunderstorms of the season, laden with thunder that sounded like heavy artillery, the worst thing that could happen to a dog suffering from severe post-traumatic stress. However, before the first drop fell, something unexpected occurred. An unusual visit that would break the sterile, militarized routine of the center. A young woman, her face marked by recent grief and her eyes weary, entered the room accompanied by a little girl, no more than 6 years old, who walked with a shyness that contrasted sharply with the bright curiosity in her gaze. They were Emily and Lily, Sergeant Miller's widow and daughter, who had come to collect some belongings that had fallen into the battalion's cage and afterward had asked to see the dog that had stayed with him until the end. Mark tried to dissuade them, explaining that Rex was no longer the same, that he was dangerous, and that seeing him like that, in that state of aggressive dementia, would only cause more pain. But the woman insisted with gentle firmness, saying that her daughter needed closure, that she needed to see that her father's partner was still alive. With his heart in his throat and his hand near the remote control for the security door, Mark led them through the concrete pavilion, warning the other caretakers to stay alert. As they approached cage number 4, the silence grew thick. The other dogs, sensing the tension in the air, began to bark, creating a corridor of expectation. Rex was already on his feet, gripping the rafters, his breathing a ragged snore, his eyes fixed on the approaching figures, his body twitching with a mixture of aggression and confusion. When Lily, the little girl in her flowered dress and worn sneakers, let go of her mother's hand and darted toward the riverbank before Mark could stop her, time seemed to freeze. "No, wait!" Mark shouted, jerking back, afraid of seeing the bite, afraid of the blood. But what had happened left him paralyzed, unable to process the scene. Rex, the dog that had sent the 2 trainers to the hospital the week before, lunged at the bars, but didn't bite. I stood motionless, my nose pressed against the metal, sniffing the air frantically, my nostrils flaring and contracting as if trying to inhale a memory. Lily stopped inches from the beast, fearless, with that suicidal innocence only children and angels possess, and raised her little hand toward the river. That's when Mark saw it. The girl's hands, gripped by fear, carried the bell of an uncontrollable emotion, a vibration born of her own pain, of her father's absence, of the desperate need to connect with the only person who had slipped through her fingers. Rex saw those frightened siblings, and something in his brain, something buried beneath layers of trauma and gunpowder, clicked. The smell. It wasn't just the scent of a little girl. It was the scent of the lavender soap the family used, the scent of the house Miller carried in his uniform, the genetic scent of his alpha. The hellhound, the killing machine, let out a whimper more human than animal, a sharp, harsh sound that shattered the country's silence. Its ears, once flat against its back at the signal to attack, perked up curiously, and its tail, which had been stiff, moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, to one side. Rex sank to the ground, in a position of invisibility, a bell of emotional surrender, clinging to the bars to be as close as possible to those small fingers now sliding through the forbidden metal. He held his breath, bracing for disaster. But Lily simply stroked the wet German shepherd, whispering words he could never hear, but which to Rex were like a sacred balm. "Hello, boy. Daddy told me about you, said you were the best," the little girl murmured, and for the first time in months, Rex's muscular tension dissolved. His amber eyes lost the red glow of madness and filled with a liquid, profound sadness. From that day on, the center's routine changed drastically. Mark convinced his superiors to postpone the euthanasia, using the bond with the little girl as a last hope. Lily and her mother began visiting every day, and Rex's transformation was slow but miraculous. It wasn't that the dog magically recovered. He still had nightmares, still growled at strangers, and didn't let anything slide. But Lily and Mark had grown incredibly attached. However, when the little girl was around, the dog, who seemed like a born soldier, let his guard down. They would sit together for hours, separated by water, under Mark's strict and nervous supervision inside the playroom. Lily would read stories, show him her drawings, where Rex always appeared wearing a superhero cape, and talked to her father about how he was doing outside, how he sometimes read at school. Rex would listen, his head resting on the little girl's wheels, absorbing her sadness and offering her, in return, his absolute loyalty. A silent protection that said, "I lost him too, little one. I am alone too." But the truth was certain. The event that would determine whether Rex could reintegrate into the world or whether his fate was sealed by tragedy came one November afternoon when the heavens finally made good on their threat and unleashed an apocalyptic storm upon the city. Mark was in the workshop reviewing documents when the first real storm shook the building's concrete, a sharp, violent noise that rattled the windows. He immediately thought of Rex. He ran toward the dogs, knowing the noise would send them into a panic, but he was too late. Irrational fear, the vivid memory of the bombs in Afghanistan, gave Rex superhuman strength. He had bitten through the rusted bolt of his outdoor cage, shattering his bones in the process, and leapt over the 10-foot perimeter fence, disappearing into the dense forest surrounding the center, a forest now lashed by hurricane-force winds and torrential rain. Panic gripped Mark, who was lying on the ground because a dangerous dog was on the loose. He knew Emily and Lily had left the center just 10 minutes ago, and that to get to his house, they only had to take the shortcut through the woods. "Damn it," he yelled, grabbing the radio and toolbox and rushing out into the storm. The woods were a chaotic jumble of shadows and noise. Trees crumbled like faded colors, and the rain fell horizontally, hindering any search. Mark followed the trail of Rex's bones, which were melting into the clay, praying he found him before the local police killed him, because he knew that if they saw him, they would shoot him without a second thought. Suddenly, a piercing scream cut through the roar of the wind, a sound that resonated with Mark's blood more than with the cold rain. It was Lily. He ran toward the sound, bouncing through the mud, brushing aside branches that whipped at his face, until he reached a clearing where he was met with a scene that took his breath away. An old tree trunk, rotten with age, had given way to the wind and crashed down, trapping Emily's carriage beneath its branches, which had been pulled off the road. Emily lay unconscious at the wheel, her nose bleeding. But Lily wasn't in the carriage. The girl had managed to climb out, perhaps seeking help, and now she lay huddled on the ground, gripped by terror, while a pack of coyotes, drawn by the storm and the opportunity, circled her, their eyes glowing in the darkness like malevolent embers. But between the girl and the predators stood a barrier, Rex. The dog was there, soaked, his shaggy fur matted with mud and blood, standing on all fours like a statue of protective fury. He wasn't the frightened dog that had escaped its cage. He was the warrior, the soldier. Even as the men continued to explode overhead, mimicking the bombs that terrified him, Rex didn't move, didn't whine. His instinct to protect his alpha's dog had overcome his own trauma. When one of the coyotes tried to attack the girl, Rex intercepted it in mid-air with efficient brutality, a precise bite to the tail that sent the intruder flying several meters. The fight was fierce and unequal, 3 against 1, and although Rex was stronger, old, and inherited, he fought with the desperation of one who knows this is his last mission. Mark drew his gun but couldn't fire. The sound of the shot in the air was enough to scatter the remaining coyotes. He ran to the girl, wrapped her in his jacket, and then stepped away from Rex. The dog lay on the ground, breathing heavily, with deep wounds in his side and a broken leg, but his eyes were fixed on Lily. When the girl, sobbing hysterically, approached him, Rex barked at her hand, the same hand that had been hidden in the river, closing the circle of their promise. "Good boy, Rex, good boy," Lily crooned, hugging the animal's wet body as the sirens of ambulances and police cars began to drift toward the field, approaching like a cavalry regiment. The drive to the veterinary hospital was a silent agony. Mark drove the patrol car at top speed, glancing in the rearview mirror at Lily, who refused to let go of Rex's paw in the back seat. The veterinarians were clear. The blood loss was massive, the internal damage severe, and Rex's age was working against him. That night, an extraordinary vigil formed in the clinic's waiting room. Police officers, trainers who had once feared him, and at the center of it all, Emily, blindfolded, and Lily, asleep on a plastic bed covered with Mark's clothes. No one spoke. They all waited for the red light in the operating room to go out, aware that what was at stake was not just the life of a dog, but the redemption of a story that had begun with death in the middle of the desert. At dawn, the surgeon emerged, his face weary and his coat stained. Mark stood, feeling like everything was crumbling around him. "It's tough," the veterinarian said, removing his surgical cap. "He's only the third dog I've ever seen. He refuses to die. He's stable." The collective sigh of relief seemed to raise the temperature in the room. Rex had survived, not because his body was invincible, but because now he had a reason to stay, a mission to fulfill, to watch the little girl who had brought him peace grow up. Months later, Rex's farewell ceremony took place in a drab workshop in a sunlit park. A 21-gun salute was fired, but something even better happened. The police chief handed Emily the official adoption papers, transferring custody of K9 Rex, license plate 458, to the Miller family. Rex, now walking with a bravery that lent him an air of veteran dignity, no longer wore his tactical jacket or backpack, just a simple leather collar with a shiny tag. He sat calmly beside Lily, watching the crowd not as a threat, but as witnesses. When Mark approached to say goodbye, he knelt before the dog and stroked his head. Something he had done months before. "Mission accomplished, soldier," he whispered, his voice breaking. Rex looked at him, and in his eyes there were no ghosts, no deserts, no explosions. Only the reflection of the little girl juggling beside him, stroking his ear with those tiny hands he could no longer hold. Because now he had something solid and furry to cling to. The dog who had refused to move to feel love had finally found his home, proving that sometimes the deepest wounds aren't healed with medicine, but with the unwavering loyalty of a heart that refuses to forget how to love. As Lily tossed a tennis ball that bounced clumsily across the meadow, Rex got up, not like a police dog, but simply like Rex, and ran after her, leaving behind forever the cage, the fear, and the war, running toward a future where the only thing that mattered was his little girl's laughter. Arriving home wasn't the end of the story everyone expected, but the beginning of a silent domestic war. A different kind of trench where the enemy wasn't bombs, but normality itself. Emily and Lily's house, a 2-story building with a backyard and a white wooden ditch, seemed like paradise to any dog. But for Rex, it was unfamiliar territory full of invisible traps. The first few days were unbearably tense. Mark, although not technically in charge, dedicated every afternoon after his shift to overseeing the transition, aware that a dog with Rex's history was like an unshielded grenade in a living room. Rex didn't understand the concepts of couch, rug, or television. To him, the sound of the water tanker was like an approaching attack helicopter, and the mailman's horn sounded like an intruder breaching the security perimeter. The first night in the house was a disaster, as is often the case with adoption experiments that end before they even begin. Emily had set up a heavy orthopedic bed in a corner of the room, next to the ventilation shafts, with new toys and soft blankets. But when the lights went out, Rex's instincts kicked in. He started patrolling. I couldn't sleep. His claws tapped rhythmically on the wooden floorboards, moving from the front door to the backyard, checking the windows, sniffing the plaster. Every 5 minutes, he let out a low growl into the darkness of the garden. Emily, lying on her loft bed, listened to the animal's footsteps below and felt a cold fear in her stomach. Had I made a mistake? Was I putting my daughter in danger by bringing a wild predator into the house? At 3 in the morning, a loud noise, like a cat leaping from a boat, sounded as if Rex were barking with a ferocity that made the walls tremble. Lily came downstairs rubbing her eyes, and Emily ran after her, terrified that the dog, on high alert, wouldn't recognize the girl in the dark. "Rex, no!" Emily screamed from the other end of the stairs, frozen in place. But I watched without saying a word. Rex was in an attack stance in front of the door. His fur straightened, but when he saw Lily standing on the last step in her wool pajamas, the dog calmed down. Lily wasn't afraid. She walked over, ignoring her mother's warnings, and sat down on the cold ground next to the German giant. "You're afraid of the dark, aren't you?" she asked, with that crushing childish logic. "Me too, but there aren't any monsters here. Dad checked everything before he left." Rex, confused by the change in tone, came closer and sniffed her fur. Lily did something Mark had strictly forbidden. She hugged the dog and rested her head on his muscular chest. Rex sighed, a long, deep sigh, and settled down right there on the hard ground, serving as a pillow for the little girl. Emily understood then that Rex wasn't patrolling to hunt, but to protect them. That night, mother, daughter, and dog slept in the room, in a messy pile of blankets, beginning the real herding process. The following months were a roller coaster of small triumphs and painful setbacks. The residential neighborhood wasn't ready for Rex. The elderly, kind people walking their golden retrievers and Labradors would cross the street when they saw Emily walking with the beast. Rumors spread. "This dog is a donkey," they'd say at the corner store. "He should be in a cage." The discrimination hurt Emily more than anything else because she saw what no one else did. How Rex patiently waited for Lily to finish relieving herself so he could eat the crumbs. Or how, when Lily had a fever and was confined to bed, Rex refused to go into the garden, lying on the bedposts like a stone guardian, not eating or drinking until the fire went out. It was an almost pathological loyalty, an absolute devotion. But Rex's trauma had geological layers. One Saturday afternoon, during a barbecue at the home of some animals trying to be inclusive, the incident occurred. Someone lit bonfires to celebrate a birthday. It wasn't much, just a few crackles and hisses, but to Rex's mind, it was like a mortar attack. He was tied to a tree with a wide leash, resting in the shade. But at the first crackle, the transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. He snapped. Without the leash, without his control. He started biting his head, throwing teeth into the air, turning on himself, screaming with a terror that made everyone present bleed. People screamed. Children ran. Mark, who had been invited, ran over, but even he couldn't get close. Rex was blind, sad, lost in Kandahar. It was Lily who, in the midst of the chaos, began to sing. It was a dizzying song, something about a star and a ship, but I sang it with all my might, her trembling voice breaking through the adults' panic. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, where are you? I want to see you twinkle." We walked closer, our hands outstretched. "Lily, no," whispered Mark, ready to stop her if necessary. But the little girl kept singing. The sound of her voice, so familiar, so strong against the noise of war, acted like an anchor. Rex stopped spinning. He was panting, foaming at the mouth, his eyes wide, but his ears were attuned to the song. The bond between the little girl and the dog was an invisible thread, stronger than any steel chain. When Lily reached her side, Rex collapsed, exhausted by the adrenaline, and shed the tears that streamed down the little girl's face. That day, the neighborhood stopped seeing a monster and saw a suffering creature, and understood, perhaps for the first time, the price some pay for the freedom of others. However, the real test, the event that would transform this story from a family anecdote into a local legend, came with the coldest winter of the decade. An unprecedented blizzard ravaged the region, cutting off electricity and phone lines, and leaving roads impassable under a meter of snow. The house became an island of cold. The heating failed on the second night. The cold was an insidious enemy that seeped in through the doors. Preserve the original language with the fireplace, but the fire was dying down. Mark tried to reach them in his 4x4, but got stuck 5 kilometers away. And then the unthinkable happened. Lily, searching for her cat who had escaped through a poorly closed window, went out into the back garden into the whiteout. Visibility was 0. The wind howled with such force that colors blurred in seconds. Emily, who was in the kitchen trying to light a portable gas stove, said nothing for a few minutes. "Lily!" she shouted, running to the open back door, which was met by the wind. Nothing, just a white wall and a bone-chilling cold. Panic was total, absolute. Emily went outside, calling her daughter's name, but the wind carried her words away. If she stumbled, she would fall in the snow, disoriented. She didn't know which way was north or south. There she was, freezing to death just a few meters from her house, searching for her lost daughter. But he wasn't alone. A black and gold shadow shot out of the house like a heat-seeking missile. Rex. The dog wasn't using his sight. In that whiteness, it was useless. He was using his sense of smell, a biological tool honed by evolution and military training. I ignored Emily for a second, knowing that the priority was the dog, the most vulnerable. Rex sank into the deep snow, chest down, moving forward with fierce determination. He sniffed the cold air, separating the molecules of fur from Lily's faint scent. I found her 200 meters from the house, huddled at the foot of a pile of old tools, semi-conscious from hypothermia, embraced by a cat. I had no idea, which was the worst possible sign. Rex was the thief. He knew he was wasting energy and heat. It was something he'd learned during his avalanche rescue training, something he'd never had to use in the desert, but his muscle memory remembered. He bent over her. He covered Lily's small body with sweat, enveloping her with his thick fur and his body heat, which was over 38 degrees Celsius. He lifted her face roughly, not tenderly, just to stimulate circulation, to keep her awake. He murmured softly against her ear, a steady vibration that said, "Don't worry, stay with me, hold on." Guided by the rhythmic barks Rex emitted each time the little girl was safe, Emily managed to reach them, though they were already crawling. What I saw was a cry of gratitude and pain. Rex was fighting fiercely, his body shielding the polar wind, absorbing the full force of the storm so the little girl wouldn't feel it. He didn't move when Emily arrived. He refused to get up until Emily scooped Lily up in her arms. The walk home was a death march, step by step, with Rex pushing Emily from behind, gently nipping at his shelter when she wanted to give up, forcing her to follow him. When they finally got into the kitchen and closed the door, they collapsed. But it wasn't over. Lily wasn't doing well. Her lips were purple. Rex, exhausted, almost frozen, didn't go to bed. He climbed onto the sofa next to the girl, something he'd been forbidden to do, and clung to her again, giving her every last bit of warmth. Mark left 4 hours later with a rescue team after having walked miles on snowshoes. I found the house silent. As I walked in, tactical lights slashing through the darkness, I saw the scene on the sofa. The girl, the mother, and the dog all tangled up in a tangle of blankets and limbs. Rex weakly raised his head to look at Mark, pushed the glue aside once, and then rested his head back on Lily's chest. They were alive. The recovery that night revealed Rex's fate on dry land, as part of the family, as a living legend in the community. The story of the soldier who saved a girl in a blizzard appeared in local and state newspapers. People began leaving bags of high-quality food and toys at his doorstep. The mayor wanted to give him a medal, but Emily refused the public ceremony. "I don't want medals," she told reporters. "I just want to be on his red carpet." But back then, he was an enemy who couldn't bite or bark. Years passed, and the last time he attacked Rex, he did so with the same brutality as in the war. His chairs stopped talking. Hip dysplasia, common in his breed and aggravated by his old battle wounds, robbed him of the ability to run. He couldn't climb the stairs to sleep in Lily's room. Mark, now a close family friend and a father figure to Lily, built a wooden ramp so Rex could get up to the garden. Seeing a formidable warrior reduced to a gray-haired old man who needed help to get up was heartbreaking, but there was dignity in his posture. Don't worry. His eyes, though veiled by incipient tears, followed Lily, now a 14-year-old teenager, around the room. The bond had evolved. Lily was no longer the girl who needed physical protection. Now she was the one who cared for him. He gently cleaned his paws, took his medicine wrapped in cheese, and sat down south, reading his high school history books. Rex listened, breathing heavily, happy simply to be there, to witness the life of the person he had chosen to live in. She had more than fulfilled her mission. She had taken Sergeant Miller's place, had handled the most important things until she could fend for herself. The end left a serene golden autumn, a stark contrast to the storms and explosions that had marked his life. Rex didn't wake up to wake up. He simply lay in his bed, breathing shallowly. Lily sensed, with that painful intuition that comes with deep love, that the time had come. I called Mark, who was flying in from the precinct, and Emily, who was coming off work. They sat around his bed in the living room, sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating the octopus-like particles that danced in the air. In a panic, you wouldn't go to the vet. I had decided that. Unless he was in acute pain, he would go home, surrounded by his scent, by his pack. Rex opened his eyes for the last time. He looked at Mark, the man who had given him a second chance and who had slowly faded away. He looked at Emily, the woman who had opened her home to him. And finally, his clouded gaze fell upon Lily. The little girl, silent tears streaming down her cheeks, stroked that soft spot behind his ears that she loved so much. "It's okay, Rex," she whispered, her voice breaking but firm. "Daddy's waiting for you. Come and get him. Your shift's over, soldier. You're relieved." As he listened to those words, or perhaps simply sensing the peace in his girl's voice, Rex exhaled one last deep breath, freeing himself from the weight of the years, from the pain of the lives he had inherited, from the eternal watch. His heart, large and weary, stopped. In that instant, the room didn't feel empty, but rather filled with a solemn and loving presence. Mark, the tough guy, covered his face with his hands and laughed. They buried him in the garden, under the tree where he liked to sleep in the summer. They placed a marble headstone. Lily chose a large stone from the river and marked it by hand. "Don't close them, don't fight the military." I could only gather 3 words, the only ones that truly defined what that dog had been, the one who refused to move when he saw fearsome hands. And she says that, to this day, when there's a storm and the truths echo through the house, Lily isn't afraid. She sits by the window, looking out at the garden and smiling, because she knows that, somewhere, amidst the shadows and the rain, there's a German shepherd patrolling the perimeter, making sure nothing bad happens to her baby, keeping watch over a guard that never stops death. The silence that Rex left in the house was louder than any bark. Weeks passed, and routine tried to return to her bed, but the sound of his claws on the wood, his comforting weight at the foot of the bed, the invisible security that permeated the air were all missing. Lily, though she tried to be strong, was fading away. Her notes in primary school stopped, she stopped talking, and she spent her afternoons sitting in front of the garden stone, talking to herself, her gaze lost in a void that no human could fill. Mark was worried. He knew grief was normal, but this was different. Lily, lying on the floor, had lost a pet. He had lost his last tangible link to his priest. Rex had been the bridge between her and the man who died in the war, and now that that bridge had collapsed, she felt isolated on an island of sorrow. A month later, Mark received an unexpected call from the military base. It was the logistics officer for the former canine unit. They were sorting through old files and found a forgotten metal box at the back of a warehouse, labeled with Rex's serial number and Sergeant Miller's name. "We think you want it," I said from the other end of the line. Mark headed to the base with a knot in his stomach. As he handed over the rusted and deteriorated box, he felt the weight of history in his hands. That night, at the kitchen table, with Emily and Lily watching expectantly, Mark opened the box. The smell of octopus and weapons permeated the room. Inside were everyday objects: a worn belt, a smashed con game, and a field notebook with faded leather covers. Emily took the notebook with trepidation. They were Miller's notes from his vacation. But they didn't contain tactical notes. They were letters that had never been sent. "Day 45, Emily read aloud, her voice cracking. "Rex is acting strange today. Keep looking at the picture of Lily he took inside the car. I think he knows she was missing. He saved me from stepping on a broken wire today. He promised that if we made it out of this, I'd take him home. He promised he'd look after my daughters. He's been teaching Lily secret tricks. I hope I can show them to her someday." Lily jerked her head up. "Secret tricks?" she asked, a flicker of curiosity mingled with pain. "Keep reading. In the last few pages, you'll find a handwritten list of strange commands, words that weren't standard German or English commands, the kind the police used. There were absurd keywords: butterfly, thunder, whisper. Next to each word was a description of an action." Mark frowned. "I've never seen Rex do anything like that," I said. But Lily jumped to her feet as if an electric current had run through her. I ran to the yard, where the grass was just beginning to grow in the vacant lot. "What if he taught someone else?" he muttered to himself, remembering something he'd seen in the park weeks before Rex killed him. Rex had been unusually interested in a stray dog, a mixed-breed dog, scared and afraid of it wandering around the neighborhood, leaving some of its food near the gutter. The story took an unexpected turn the following week. Mark received a report about an aggressive and elusive dog causing trouble in the industrial area, stealing food and growling at the workers. The description matched that of the mixed-breed dog Lily had seen. Eban called animal control to have it euthanized. Mark, driven by an inexplicable impulse, decided to go himself, taking Lily and Emily with him. They found the dog chained up on a quiet street behind an abandoned factory. It was an unusual mix, maybe something like a Belgian shepherd, nervous, dirty, and terrified. Look into its eyes, ready to bite. Mark set the trap, but Lily stopped him. "Wait," she said. "Aim when you stop." The dog wasn't in a disorganized attack stance. It was in a perfect military guard position, its center of gravity low, protecting its flank, exactly as Rex used to do. Lily took a step forward. The dog growled. Mark tensed his muscles. Then Lily whispered one of the words from the priest's notebook: "Butterfly." The effect was instantaneous and almost supernatural. The stray dog, that beast that saves and sucks, stopped growling. It tilted its head to one side, lowered its ears, and, with incredible gentleness, raised a front paw and held it in the air, twisting its wrist. That was the trick. Butterfly was the command for a gentle greeting. Mark and Emily stared at each other, stunned. Rex, on his walks, on his nightly forays into the garden, on the ground, had been watching. I had been training. I had found a lost soul, just like him, and passed on my legacy. I taught her the language of her alpha. It was as if Rex knew his time was running out and was preparing a replacement, a secret apprentice, so his girls would never be alone. Take me home. It wasn't easy. I was covered in fleas, malnourished, and distrustful of everyone except Lily. But I had Rex's school in my blood. They called him Scout. Scout wasn't Rex. He was clumsy, very clumsy, and a bit of a panty thief, but he had the same noble look and the same absolute devotion to Lily. Scout's adjustment filled the house with energy. Where Rex had been a wise and solemn grandfather, Scout was a mischievous younger brother who needed guidance. And Lily, for the first time since her father's death, found a purpose. She took up her field notebook, put on her father's old baseball cap, and, with Mark's help, began to train Scout diligently. Years passed, and the cycle completed unexpectedly. Lily grew up and decided not to go to art school as planned. I joined the police academy. I wanted to be a dog handler. He wanted to understand the world his priest, Rex, had created. On her graduation day from the academy, the stadium was packed. When her name was announced, Officer Lily Miller, she received respectful applause. But silence fell when her escort arrived for the badge presentation. It wasn't human. To the south, walking with impeccable military stride, wearing a brand new police uniform, was Scout. They were able to verify it. The stray dog, Rex's secret heir, was now her official escort. Mark, sitting in the front row next to a beaming Emily, saw something he'd already suspected. Or perhaps it confirmed his belief that the universe holds beautiful mysteries. Just as Lily greeted the committee, a beam of light streamed through the gymnasium's tall windows, illuminating the empty space to her right. For an instant, a fraction of a second, the shimmering light seemed to reveal the robust and powerful silhouette of a German shepherd, standing guard, watching. Lily felt it too. He reached to his right side, where no one was, and his fingers vibrated in the air as if caressing an invisible head. Scout, with his left hand, looked at that same empty space and moved the glue, recognizing the driver. Rex's story ends with his last breath on the carpet. It continued in every patrol Lily and Scout took, in every lost child they found, in every life they saved. The wounded dog who refused to move until he felt love had created a movement. I was taught that trauma isn't the end, but a battlefield where love can win if you have the courage to stay still and let it find you. And every night, before he went to sleep, Officer Miller looked at the photograph on his nightstand, his young priestess in the desert with a dog named Rex, and next to it, a picture of her with an elderly Rex. Turn off the light, and in the darkness, you know you'll never walk alone. Because true heroes haven't gone away. They've simply changed shifts, moving from watching over the earth to patrolling the stars, waiting for the moment when they'll hear their alpha's voice again and hear, "Good boy, home."